You're doing really well if you've got this far in our short lectures here. Now, our story has moved forward to 1898, when George F. Milnes meets a certain German gentleman called Wilhelm Busch. The story is like this. The good folk of Liverpool bought electric tramcars from Hamburg, made by a firm. I can't pronounce the word properly, but one of the words in this great long German sentence, it's about that long, is Maschinenfabrik. Maschine und Fabrik. And Mr. Wilhelm Busch was the managing director, and he came to Liverpool to presumably tell them how wonderful his electric tramcars were. And some clever person in Wavertree, whose name escapes me, he was a major, I think, introduced the two, and with a suggestion that a new company be formed to try and exploit this electric traction, which seemed to be catching on like wildfire. This was a great opportunity for G.F.Milnes because it didn't have a proper tie-up with an electrical manufacturer. It had been friendly with Mather and Platt for about 6 years, but they're in Manchester. And if I'm allowed to say it, I don't think Mather and Platt were market leaders, so to speak. Probably there'll be people saying, yes, they were. But anyway, their rivals, Milnes' rivals at this time, were the United Electric Car Company, which in 1899, I think, decided to go big and start mass producing trams in Preston, which was most unfortunate because really the Milnes setup, they were sort of hand built in a small batch. But UEC, as they became United Electric Car, wanted to do them on Ford production, American production line type basis. And the other rivals were Brush in Loughborough, and they had a strong tie-up with an electrical firm because they'd been bought by an electrical firm. So they decided to form a new company. I think it's called George F. Milnes. Either it's George F. Milnes or it's G.F.Milnes. It's a very similar name to the other company. Of course, you would expect Alexander Bruce to be lurking in the background somewhere. I won't mention any more about it. So this is the new Castle Car Works in Hadley. It was a redundant factory that they'd bought, and so they only had to move and modify it. They fitted lots of electrical machinery to work the saws and planing machines, etc., etc. They had their own, I'm going to show you here, look, they've got their own canal, which they never had in Birkenhead, and they've got their own rail connection, which Milnes in Birkenhead never had. And they've got plenty of land for expansion, which it was impossible in Birkenhead. So all the things were in favour. I think probably the biggest drawback was they were a bit late in getting into the market. So this new syndicate formed to expand the old firm of G.F.Milnes, and G.F.Milnes was bought out but remained managing director, and they got their money. They got a dividend for the sale of the old company. Now it's called the Castle Car Works. There isn't a castle there. It's an old mill. This is the mill. It's still in the complex. It's really a mill, but as you see, it has a castellated top, so it's called the Castle Car Works. It featured on the letter heading at the time. I'm going to try and go a bit quicker. I'm conscious at least half of you have now fallen asleep. This is a sunshade car. I think it's in Johannesburg. I like it because it's got 3 horses pulling it. This is Milnes' biggest order ever, 451 cars. A massive order. And also, they were super deluxe cars. Robinson, who I think the name of the company is Metropolitan, one of the London companies, maybe it's LUT, a London tramway company anyway, they wanted to fight off the competition from the London Underground by carrying people in luxury trams above ground. Excuse me. So look at the quality of the workmanship in these cars. Lovely swags, just doing absolutely nothing apart from looking nice. It's like a stateroom on a Cunard ship or a White Star ship at the time. And you've got to admit, the National Tramway Museum have done a fantastic job on this car. Interestingly, I read that the veneering on the ceiling, which is bird's eye maple veneering, on the trams I've seen built by Milnes, it's always bird's eye maple. And this veneering was supplied by an American company in New York, in Sheboygan, called the Frost Veneering Company. And you look them up on the internet and there's a little history of them. And they were the world's biggest plywood suppliers, exotic woods. And they probably provided this to the exact size that they required, because bird's eye maple is very expensive veneer, so you don't want wastage. And also that the ceiling panels on a standard gauge tram, they're a weird size, like 5 foot by 5 foot, and as you know, plywood doesn't come in those sizes normally. I'm still waiting to have a ride on this tram. It's always had a few snags when I've been to the National Tramway Museum, but that picture just shows how beautiful it is. Export order for Madras, understandably covered toast rack. What amuses me is that the advert's in English, and yet the car is riding around in Madras. Madras has got a new name now. Is it Chennai? No, don't let me know. Don't tell me. Manchester gave them a huge order for trams, so much so that Manchester weren't ready for them to be delivered, and they were piling up. They wanted them out of the factory. I think they stored them at Stafford temporarily. But here's the order going out. 1, 2, 4, about 10 cars on special low loaders. No, not low loaders, just flatbed bolsters. My problem is I study these photographs with great forensic magnifying glasses, etc. And I realised that the poster in the window saying Manchester Tram made by Hadley is exactly the same typeface as this picture of the Smiths who work in this is just the Smiths department of the factory. And that typeface there, G.F.Milnes, Castle Car Works, is exactly the same as the posters within those railway wagons we've just seen. I'm amused that there's a no smoking sign up when all these blokes are working in loads of hearths. Hearths, a bit difficult to say with this thing on. I'm interested that you can see the lads, the trainee lads. Let's just get rid of this red. It's annoying me. No, I can't. Right, can you see the lads here? I'll just point to them. One there, one there, one there, one there. They must have been, well, probably the sons of some of these chaps. They probably had to hold things that were being hammered by the real men with muscles. Let's move on. I'm talking rubbish. They built this super deluxe car. There was just one in the Bournemouth fleet like this. It was like the director's saloon, like the one we have for Mr. Bruce in the Isle of Man. And this was the Tramway exposition. Yeah, well, that's about 1901 in London. It's a gorgeous tram. The maker's plate for G.F.Milnes Hadley, as found on the Chester tram number 4. They didn't always use maker's plates. They sometimes put a transfer on, a tracing from the great FK Pearson. I've got a feeling that you've got those maker's plates for the cars that were made in Hadley. Andrew Scarf's got that sorted. Nice car for Bath. I've put this in because it shows the smoking and non-smoking parts of the tram. There's the non-smoking end, and this is non-smoking here, and in between is the smoking area. Of course, when the door opens, the smoke just wafts around, but because it's a single deck car, you couldn't say to the people, the smokers go upstairs please, because there is no upstairs. So this is how they got round this problem of smoking and non-smoking. It's nothing new that some people don't like it and some people love it. Birkenhead had a similar problem with their new ferry route, and they had cars very similar to this. Notice the doorway. The doorway is offset just like our cars in the Isle of Man. Thank you for your patience. Well, I think that concludes our short tour of Hadley. I'm conscious I've been going on far too long. I've got a message here. I've just been handed it. It's an urgent message for Mr. Callum Tilley of the Groudle Glen Railway. So this message is for Callum Tilley of the Groudle Glen Railway. There's been a mix-up with the people at Chester. Unfortunately, at Ronaldsway, a real polar bear has arrived. Could he go to Ronaldsway Airport and please sort that out? Thank you. This is the end of the public information film story. Hi. I'd like to say you're all wonderful that you got this far, both of you. We've got as far as 1901 now, and considering we started in 1860, we've covered 40 years of tramcar manufacture in Birkenhead. So well done. We've only got another 13 years to go now, and the last 13 years are more or less about G.F.Milnes Voss. Strange sounding name, but Milnes was a name that you could recognize, like Ford or Chevrolet. In this case, it was Milnes. And Mr. Voss had worked for the old company. He was the chief draftsman, and they set up this little company. Now they realized they weren't going to be a big player, but they found a niche market, and this niche market was in top covers. But before I mention top covers, I found a picture of G.F.Milnes himself. Now, can anyone guess where he is on this picture? Lady in Castletown thinks it's the bloke on the extreme left. That's very uncharitable of you. No, actually, this picture does amuse me because the people who should be driving the tram here have been told to stand at the back while all these bigwigs, all these important people. It's during the inspection by Colonel von Donop of the tramcar, the new line in New Ferry, and this I believe to be G.F.Milnes. He fits all the right parameters. Another thing that amuses me on this picture is this common looking fellow here. He's been told to stand out of the picture. He's got a flat cap on. Now, so let's just have a look at the next image. So I think that's G.F.Milnes. It's the only picture I have of him. I've got one of Thomas Voss. Is he coming up? This is where the Milneses lived in Birkenhead. George Combe was born there in 1877, and the Milneses had lived there a few years prior to that. And this is where Thomas Voss came to live. Thomas Voss had started work with another tramcar firm, a railway carriage builders called Hurst Nelson in Scotlandshire, and then he went down to Birmingham and worked for one of the companies there. I'm sorry, I've forgotten. It could be the Birmingham Railway and Carriage or one of those. But he came up and got a job as the chief draftsman with G.F.Milnes, and then he settled in this street, which is a busy shopping street and still is, Grange Road West. There he is. That's Thomas Voss. He's at the Tramways exhibition. They had a small, compared with Milnes, who had a massive stall, Thomas Voss had a very small stall, and they were just selling patent rainproof seats. This is the site of their small works. I'm going to get my little thingy out here. There we are. You can just see it here. It's a very small. This is the electric tram line here, going to called the line of docks, and these are the railway lines in the docks. They couldn't occupy the old factory because it had been sold, but they bought this factory here. It's got two entrances. There's an entrance on Old Bidston Road here, and an entrance here on Cleveland Street. I'm not quite sure how much of this extra property they occupied, these houses. They may have had some of this land as well. I've got a lovely letter in my file from a lady who was a little child when her parents worked there. She was a cleaner in the offices, and the husband worked there during the week. I think the cleaner went in once a week. Right, so that's where it is, at the north end of Birkenhead. Now, their speciality, I mentioned it first thing, that what the niche market they found was fitting top covers. Most trams, 1899, 1900, were open top. And people don't like going along at the top of a tram at 15 miles an hour in a howling gale or in the rain. So these top covers were fitted, and G.F.Milnes Voss got the price down to £56 fitted at the depot, and they would come and do one trial on one tram to see if you liked it. So they did some very good business. And even Wallasey, because Wallasey's the town next to Birkenhead, traditionally towns next to each other don't speak to each other, and Wallasey didn't speak to Birkenhead, but on this occasion they buried a very large hatchet and decided to buy some top covers. And so they bought these £56 as opposed to the UEC or Electric Railway and Carriage Company or whatever they're called in Preston, 85 quid. A snip. Oh, this tram's going back to depot. There's been an accident with a plate glass window. And here's an advert for G.F.Milnes, Voss and Co. Cleveland Street. And they list their customers for top covers: Leeds, Wallasey, Barnsley, Portsmouth, Birkenhead, Ilford, Salford, Oldham, Nelson, Bolton, Hull, Sheffield, Huddersfield, Barking, East London, Nottingham, Trafford Park, etc. So they did some good business there. They also did quite a few top covers with London, and London eventually said, can we build them and pay you a license fee? And they said, yeah, okay, you pay us a fiver, or whatever the amount they agreed. And then London carried on making them, and it got litigious because Milnes Voss said, hang on, you've only paid us for 10 and you built 50. And they thought, can we go to court, take London County Council to court? They decided not. Everyone was making top covers. It wasn't worth pursuing the legal remedy. How that little factory made 40 trams, I'll never know. I suspect they hired some other premises and outsourced a lot of the work. 40 was a great order to get when you think what the competition was like. And I have a suspicion the reason they got the order was that some of the bigger people were not paying union rates. And some of these towns in London, like Leighton, insisted that the labour was paid the standard union rate. So that I suspect that's why they got the business and the big boys didn't. I'm not certain, I may be wrong, but I suspect it was to do with rates of pay. This is the works. Well, I took that picture 20 years ago, but it hasn't changed very much. This is insides. See later. This is the Cleveland Street end. The roof. This roof. I'm going to get my little thing out here. Here we go. The roof was originally a Belfast truss roof. Try and make that smoother. Which is a curved roof. And one of the buildings in the adjacent area still has the Belfast truss roof on. Unfortunately, in 1913, there was a build-up of snow on the roof and it collapsed. That's the trouble with a roof that has a very flat area here. It's at its weakest. It's at its weakest at this point here. It's very flat there, and the snow built up, and it caved in. That was more or less the end of it. They picked up some interesting orders. They built a railway carriage for the Mersey Railway on behalf of Westinghouse, who supplied all the difficult bits. All the wiring and motors were done in Manchester, but the bodywork was done by G.F.Milnes Voss. I suspect, it's got a date on it, 1905. I suspect the reason for these photographs is because of staged payments. after a certain amount of progress, they would get paid 25%, and then 50% when the panelling was on, etc. So I think that it wasn't just to say how good we are at making trams; it's because of the payments for these cars. This is a post-Second War picture of the area. All this area was terribly bombed by the Luftwaffe, and around here was bombed as well. So what we see of the remains of this is the G.F.Milnes factory here. Unfortunately, this is about all that remains. It's terribly bombed. Okay. This is the old Bidston Road end, and the factory next to Milnes has still got the Belfast truss roof there, which you can see. This is actually the G.F.Milnes Voss building, but I can't. There's every chance that there's a possibility that they also occupied this building in 1902. The records don't exist. Here we are, another close-up map showing the factory here, various buildings and add-ons, travelling crane. So I haven't been able to get much deeper into that. So let me just sum up. The trams made, the total number of trams made in Birkenhead was around 3,500, which you've got to admit is a pretty formidable figure, considering 99.9% of the population of Wirral have no idea that there was an international thriving factory that made tramcars in Birkenhead, which is such a shame. But we, and by we I mean us enthusiasts, and especially in the Isle of Man, we're aware of the importance of G.F.Milnes. And what's fantastic is that over 50 trams are surviving in the Isle of Man. Are running in the Isle of Man, which I think is wonderful. Trams made by G.F.Milnes, George F. Milnes, G.C. Milnes Voss, and you've got the trams made by the other firms we don't mention. So I hope you've enjoyed the little G.C. Milnes Voss discourse. I tried to keep it short, even then it was probably too long. As you'd expect from me, I do have a message. I have a colleague call for Mr. Bruce, Mr. Alexander Bruce. Could you come to the cashier's office in Dumble's Bank at number 1 Prospect Hill, Douglas? That's Mr. Alexander Bruce to the cashier's office. Thank you. Hi. This section has been the most difficult for me to record because I don't know as much as you people out there in Isle of Man enthusiast land. So you'll have to forgive my shortcomings. But really, I just want to emphasize the fact that Birkenhead had a relationship with the Isle of Man for nearly 40 years in making, I think, probably around 100 trams. So Milnes and Birkenhead have been had a fantastic customer in the Isle of Man. And what is remarkable is that about over 50 trams, I think, survive to this day that were built by Milnes or in Birkenhead, which is fantastic. And the story, the first trams, as we've learned, if you've managed to stay awake during this diatribe, is that the first trams were delivered in 1876 at the behest of Mr. Lightfoot at the bargain price. I think we said it was £8,000, didn't we? There's a beautiful double-deck car. That's the first of the 3 cars that came to the island. Sorry, that's number 2. I don't know which one arrived first. Oh, interesting. I wonder where the picture is. In 1884, that one of those 3 cars, which had been open top, a single deck, was sent back to Starbucks to have a top deck put on. So popular were the horse trams, and they came at a bargain price of £96. Notice that's just a few quid below 100. I'm certain they just plucked the figure out of the sky. That would be about 8,500 now to put a top cover on. I'd probably make a top cover for 8,500 for a open topper, for a single decker rather, today. Right. Oh, so there we are, 1882. That's one of, that could be one of the. Oh no, that's the next batch of cars, 1882. Pretty standard stuff for Starbuck at this time. First of the toast racks arrived in 84. Interesting that there's an advert for the Falcon lift here, just on this part of the tram here, an advert for the Falcon lift. And the Falcon lift was built in 1887, so this is a few years after. Another, I always like to see a picture within the context, and look at these three lovely fellas here. They're straight out of a Sherlock Holmes episode. And also, you'll notice these people have got umbrellas up, not because it rains, because it very rarely rains in the Isle of Man. It's to keep the sun off them, as you possibly know. Having a suntan denoted you were common in Victorian times. It's car 11. This is one of the last of the cars built by Starbucks. It would be nice to think it was the last car built by Starbucks, but the order book was taken over by G.F.Milnes in 1886, as we have learnt in our earlier episodes. 1890, another toast rack arrived. I like the hat he's got on, the conductor here. Oh my thingy. There we are. It's got a nice white trilby on there. And this, doesn't this lady look glamorous? Marvellous. Where did it all go wrong? Oh, look at the happy couple here. And Mark, the horse, wants to get in on the active course. They're all extroverts, these horses. And is that Ned? I think that's Ned on the platform of 21. Still in service. Marvellous. 92. This beautiful car arrived. The vestibules were added later. You know, by vestibules I mean this thing here. There's the old depot, as we'll call it now. In 1893, Milnes supplied the first cars to collect their current from overhead for any of their customers. They 1 to 3 for the newly built Douglas de Groudle section. It must have been like supplying Concorde when you were just providing something that just had wheels and brakes before the arrival of these electric cars. And here's a happy enthusiast about to go on car 1, and that's Jamie. He's from Birkenhead, so he can't help but want to go on this car. I think his favourites are the tunnel cars, actually, but 1 and 2 are my favourites. Here's the lucky winner, showing the lottery ticket that he won for free travel on the trams for a week. And what a dilemma he has here. Will he go on the trailer 59 or will he go on car 2? I don't know what I would have done in a case like that. Being given all the sweets in the sweet shop at once there. And nice view of trailer 51 here. Originally had a canvas roof. In fact, I'm not sure it had any roof to start with. I think it might have been just a toast rack, then a canvas roof, then a covered roof. 53 also started out as an open top with a canvas roof. Andrew Scarf amusingly told me that not only are they all different in this little section, but the ends are all different as well. Oh, there's there's me on my driver experience. You don't get much happier than that, do you? And there's John Horn and Patricia Horn there. Who else? So our driver and conductor. And 9 of 1894. And now I remember seeing this, thinking how wonderful it was as an illuminated car. and now it's I don't think it's illuminated anymore now. Car 7 had been a works, eventually became a works car, and then it's been more or less totally rebuilt, and it looks great in blue, doesn't it? And there's a plate frame, 1894. You can see how crude the technology was for the time. Just two big, thick pieces of plate with a couple of holes shoved in and some slots for the axle boxes. And the axle boxes don't look anything special from a horse tram axle box or a cable car, perhaps. Yeah. Interesting, John pointed out to me the fact that it looks like it's got two windows here, but it's one. At one time it did have a bar here. I've forgotten the word. So there were two windows, but this bar was in the driver's vision. So for vision purposes, they made it one piece of glass. Very sensible too. And here's my favourite, with a couple of happy enthusiasts there, Dave and John, in the depot. And doesn't it look wonderful now? It's had a makeover. I particularly like the where they've got the Starbuck and Milnes pattern spot on there, and they've made an exact copy of the lettering. I like the way it's the Isle of Man Tramways and Electric Power Company. Surprised it didn't say Gaslight and Co. Gaslight and Coke Company. There it is. There's the maker's picture. There's our famous Enigma setting there, 507, in Cleveland Street in Birkenhead. There we are. There's the little sign they attached. Incidentally, the people in Bristol have restored a Milnes tram, and they thought this was part of the every vehicle had this on, like Ford or Chrysler or whatever they're called these days. And they've painted this onto the side of the tram. I hadn't the heart to tell them it was taken off once the photograph was taken. Don't tell the people in Bristol that. We don't want to upset them, because it's a really nice job they've done on the car. Andrew sent me this picture. They've been rubbing down one car, and of course they change the numbers just to confuse the enemy occasionally in the island. And he's come across the original number 19 for an 1895 car. Now that's the one he's working on at the moment. Of course, us restorers and enthusiasts get a thrill when we find some original piece of Roman tessera, as they might say. There's another nutty enthusiast. What a lineup! What a place to have a cup of coffee, Laxey. 1895, 1899. There's car 1 on the SMR, and it's had a bit of serious rebuilding due to age. They have a tough existence on the mountain railway. And you know what's special about this picture, don't you? It's sunny. It's not always sunny up there. And a cable car. Aren't we so lucky that in the island we've got horse, electric, and cable in one place? There's no way you can go and see that. And here it is in a lovely, nicely covered building. That's one of Keith Pearson's restoration jobs. Lovely to have that there. 37 trailer from 1896. Looks a bit drafty to me. Trailer 16 in lovely green, but I understand from one of my informants in the Y section that it's gone back to red now. You can't beat ringing the changes on these to keep the enthusiasts on their toes. I tried to look up to see what the history of this car was. I got totally confused. It's I can't even try and explain the number of fleet numbers it's had. All I'll say is it had been a trailer. It's motorised now, and its nickname is a paddle box. I like sitting next to the driver when these are on, but for a short journey only, otherwise you get frostbite. Car 15, similar. It's in their store department. Only privileged people are allowed to go around. Hey, this car 22 had been in a fire. and got rebuilt. You can hardly tell the difference. The wood looks a bit newer. Windsor Saloon. I'm always amused at the door that keeps out sort of 50% of the wind, but under the door here, there's a little bit of wind comes up there. Now I've snipped this one in because it looks like some sort of nightmare dream that there's only a 2-window car, but it's got all the facets of a Manx car, hasn't it? And this is a Milnes car that's in Mexico. It's the smallest tram in the world. I'm not sure if I mentioned it in an earlier episode. I might have. It's got the Milnes maker's plate inside it, and I think they realise its importance. It's probably the smallest tram in the world, and it's made in Birkenhead. This is out of one of my early scrapbooks in the days of photography, which involved film. And it's car 39 of 1902. Ooh, I don't know whether that's a Milnes car or a G.F.Milnes Voss. It's probably a Milnes. There's people shouting at me as I speak, I'm certain, saying, "You fool, it's Milnes." What's interesting is that these are the rooms we had. We always insist on rooms overlooking the tramway. It's a bit sad, isn't it? And I've got another, that's X. Now Y, the other part of the equation, is pointing to the driver. And I've probably written a note about the driver, which I probably won't say on live transmission. There we are. I think this hotel's been demolished now. Most of the hotels I've stayed in have been demolished. Car 45 of 1908. That's definitely a G.F.Milnes Voss car. I like it. And I think that's from our sponsors, Athol Car Hire, no doubt. And the tent's there now, isn't it? The white tent. Is it? When I next go, will the white tent still be there? That's what I want to know. And trams never fade away. They just gradually die, don't they? I don't know. This poor old thing, 47 of 1911. G.F.Milnes Voss. We've all done it. Car 1, 1913. Cost £252, which in today's money is about 20,000. That's pretty good value, I think. So we've got over 50 trams in the island. I make it 54. Cable horse and electric. Thank you. Well, that concludes this section. It may be a bit too brief for you experts, but as I said, I'm slightly out of my depth. But I hope you like looking at them. I do. Hi, this is the final chapter in this long story about Milnes and the Isle of Man. So I'd like to thank you for coming this far with me on the journey. So without prattling on too much, the main players in this game, what happened to them? Robert Main, he gave up tramcar manufacture quite quickly. George Starbuck carried on making tramcars from 1869 to 1886 and carried on forming other companies and going bankrupt well into the 1890s, died in 1913. George F. Milnes, he carried on. United Electric Car Company made him nominally manager of their sales office in London because they wanted his name. But he was quite elderly then, and when his contract expired, the restraint of trade only lasted a number of years. When that expired, he became the London representative of G.F.Milnes Voss. G.F.Milnes died in Vancouver, as we'll see. Right, so it's a bit sad, this end of the story. There we are. Robert Main, George Milnes and George Starbuck are all buried in our Birkenhead cemetery called Flaybrick. Thomas Voss, as far as I know, died in Coventry. He went to live with his in-laws, where his wife died before him. And George Comer Milnes died in Vancouver, where he gave up tramcar manufacture and went into ranching, was one of the descriptions. I also believe he went into, excuse me, computer's gone a bit peculiar. I hope he's still there. He went into ranching and also landscape gardening, as far as I know. Incidentally, Paula Lynn tells me that he was called Fred by the family because there were two Georges, and they didn't like to call him, "Hello, Comer, would you like a cup of tea, Comer?" So they called him Fred. Fred, like a cuppa. So that's a nice little story that we've got that we wouldn't have otherwise if we didn't have Paula's family connection in Canada. Just prior to Mr. Main dying, there was an article saying that the original tramcars were built in the United States of America, and Robert Main saw this in the local newspaper, and wanted to set the record straight by saying he built the first tramcars. He built the first 4 tramcars. This is in 1886, and he died in 87. So just prior to his death, he wrote from the carriage works in Clawton Road, Birkenhead, to put them straight. So that's a nice little end of his story. Robert Main's grave, like so many of the graves in Birkenhead, are damaged, vandalised by morons. I'm trying to find out if we can get the stone put back on. George Starbuck's grave likewise was pushed over, I believe, by the council because it was felt to be unsafe, and it was replaced by this humble gravestone, and that's me on the left, Charles Roberts in the middle, and Martin Jenkins, two well-known authors in the transport world, were taking on my tour of the graves. You can't beat a good grave visit, can you? There's George's humble gravestone, died 1914, aged 80, and Arabella died in 1917. Arabella was born in Australia from a very wealthy family who bought or set up the Melbourne Cricket Club. And G.F.Milnes is in his own area of the cemetery. When he died, cremation was a novelty, and Birkenhead didn't have a crematorium, so he was cremated in Anfield, and his ashes were buried here. But he's the only bloke in the ashes-only department of this part of the cemetery. Let's have a look. And there we are. There's his grave. It's been restored with help from the people in the Isle of Man. Enthusiasts contributed to the restoration and cleaning of his grave, and the monumental mason agreed to, well, they didn't agree to, they put that little plaque in black, highlighting how what an influence that G.F.Milnes did. So on that somber note, there's a few thank yous I'd like to make. I've written them down. I don't want to miss anyone out because it could be the end of my life as I know it. I'd like to thank Paula Lynn, née Milnes, in Canada for her cooperation and help. It was her that found the picture, took the picture of George F. Milnes on that testimonial, and she took it on a mobile phone and just sent it to me electronically. Isn't that marvellous? David Martin has our guru in the comms department and running this virtual transport festival, has put up with my various idiosyncrasies. Andrew Scarf's answered some questions about Manx cars because I don't know them all in great detail like some experts do. Chris Pulling and John Hewitt have been of help to me, but the mistakes, as you know, are all mine, and I apologise if I've got a car number wrong or a date wrong. I've done my best. So I'll wish you well for the rest of the Transport Festival. I think it's going to be great. So it's goodbye from Wallasey. Over to you, David, in the studio.
Thanks to Rob for covering pretty much everything there is to know about Birkenhead's tramway history and its influence across the world. This was meant to be a live presentation at the 2020 Manx Heritage Transport Festival, and it's thanks to Rob that we've been able to bring this to you online. As well as on the Isle of Man, it's possible to see and travel on vintage Milnes built trams, amongst others, at the Wirral Transport Museum and Heritage Tramway. Rob and others are volunteers for this group, and we'd highly recommend a visit if you wish to soak up more history on the line. Thanks again to Rob and other volunteers for writing and producing this presentation. We hope you've enjoyed it, and look forward to seeing you on a vintage Milnes built tramcar soon, on either side of the Irish Sea.